Hello and welcome to Cupcake Addiction's do-it-yourself marshmallow fondant recipe and tutorial. In the past, I haven't made my own fondant. I've always preferred to use store-bought fondant, and for some things I still do. But recently I've started experimenting with homemade marshmallow fondant and I absolutely love it. This is made out of marshmallows, a little bit of powdered sugar, and most people will be able to find these ingredients at their local supermarket. So tools and equipment that we'll be using for this tutorial, we've got some marshmallows. I'm using mini marshmallows today just because they melt down a little bit easier than the larger ones, but any marshmallows will melt. I'm going to start with a white marshmallow because that way we can colour our fondant any colour we like. I've got some powdered sugar or confectioner's sugar, and this has been well sifted so it's nice and aerated, it's nice and fine and really light and fluffy. I've also got a little bit of vegetable shortening. Now, depending on where you are, in the US, Crisco is a great brand of vegetable shortening. If you're in Australia, Kofa in the refrigerator section is going to be your form of shortening. Crisco in the US is a little bit softer to work with, so you don't need to do anything to prepare that. But if you're in Australia and you're going to be using Kofa, it's a little bit firmer because it's refrigerated, so you'll want to just soften it down in your microwave, just a little bit. You don't want to melt it, you just want to soften it down so that it's really, really nice and pliable. I've got just some plain tap water, and that's just room temperature tap water. I've got an assortment of colours and different sorts of colours, which I'll be talking to you about a little bit later in this tutorial when I show you how to colour up your finished product fondant. I've got a spoon measure, so it's a tablespoon measure, and I've also got a wooden spoon. So let's get started. I love this recipe because it's so easy and it's microwavable, meaning you don't need to mess up any of your pots and pans. All right, the first thing you want to do is you want to grab your tablespoon. The recipe that I'm giving you guys calls for between 2 and 5 tablespoons of water. So really it's going to depend on a few varying factors: the consistency of your powdered sugar, the type of marshmallows that you're using. I always start with 2 tablespoons, and that's what I base my recipe on. I add additional water at the very, very end if I need to adjust the consistency of my final product. You don't want to add too much water at the beginning here because you don't want a sloppy fondant. You want it to be really, really nice and firm and really pliable. So I'm just going to take my water, and in goes 2 tablespoons, anywhere you like over those marshmallows, but do try to spread it out a little bit. I'm going to pop them into the microwave just for 30 seconds. I'm going to do a couple of lots of 30 seconds, but don't be tempted to just put it in for 1.5 minutes or put it in for 2 minutes. You really want to give it that little rest, and we're going to stir it in between each microwave. So when it goes on high power for 30 seconds. All right, so particularly on this first one, it's not going to look like too much is happening, but make sure that you do give it that good stir in between. So just take your wooden spoon, make sure that you're stirring it through, and you're also distributing that water a little bit. And you'll notice your marshmallows starting to melt, and then back in the microwave for another 30 seconds. So after our second lot of 30 seconds, your marshmallows should be really starting to look like they're melting now, but we're going to give them another go just to make sure they're really nice and fluid. Quick stir, back in the microwave. All right, so our marshmallows have come out, and I'm pretty happy that they're pretty ready. You can see there, it's a really, really sticky mix. Now, you want to remember you're going to get a little bit sticky and a little bit dirty whenever you're making your own fondant, especially marshmallow fondant. But as I stir that now, you've not got any lumps or any whole marshmallows. You want to work quite quickly here because as you stir it, that marshmallow's already starting to set again. So I'm going to tip 3/4 of my powdered sugar, my sifted powdered sugar, into that marshmallow mix. And roughly 3/4, it doesn't have to be exactly. All right, so you want to start almost like folding that through, and that's really so that you don't make too much of a mess with your icing sugar. Just be careful because that melted marshmallow is going to be really hot, at least for the first few minutes or so of you stirring. The stirring portion of this does take a little bit of time, and you do need to stir it quite sort of strongly or vigorously to make sure that you're getting all of that melted marshmallow combining nicely with that powdered sugar. Don't worry too much if you end up with a bit of powdered sugar around the edges of your bowl. That's going to happen, and this recipe actually gives you a little more powdered sugar than you'll need. So if there's a little bit of waste, it's not a problem at all. All right, so once I'm at about this stage, and you can see it's really still not mixed, but that powdered sugar's started to kind of blend in a little bit to our marshmallow. So from here, we're going to start our kneading phase. All right, now you want to work quite quickly here before that marshmallow starts to set anymore. This is where our shortening comes in. So I'm just going to use my hands. This is where it starts to get really messy. And I'm going to smear a really, really good amount of that shortening all over my bench. Anywhere that you think this marshmallow fondant's going to touch. Perfect. You also want to take a bit more shortening and we're going to put it all over our hands. And this is to stop that marshmallow fondant from sticking to you, to your bench and to your surface, and to make it workable for our kneading. You want to take your marshmallow fondant and we're just going to tip it out onto the bench with all of that powdered sugar, the whole lot, and we're going to start kneading. So with that kneading, it's kind of like kneading a loaf of bread, and you'll notice as you're kneading it, it feels quite lumpy. So don't panic here because it does feel lumpy until we've kneaded it into submission a little bit. So you can see there, as I'm kneading, it's really taking on a lot more structure, but I'm still not happy. It's still sort of quite soft and quite gooey. So I'm going to take some more of this icing sugar and just place it on top, and then I'm going to knead it in. The icing sugar and the water are really how you control the consistency of your fondant. So if you live in a cooler climate, you might want to add a little bit less icing sugar and a little bit more water, so you've got a softer fondant, because when fondant gets cold, it gets quite firm and quite hard to knead. But if, like me, you live in a warmer climate, you might want to up the amount of icing sugar and reduce the amount of water so that you've got a firmer fondant, because when it's hot, fondant's a lot softer to work with. It's really up to you here, depending on the style of fondant that you want to ice with and the job that you've got for it. I'm going to continue adding just a little bit more of that icing sugar in. All right, so you'll know your fondant's getting pretty close to being ready when you start to feel it drying out a little bit to touch. So as I'm actually kneading that, I'm getting all of these little folds in the fondant itself, and they're sort of holding their own shape there. So grab a little piece of it and give it a little stretch. That's still a touch too soft because I don't want my fondant to have quite that much give. You want to sort of just get it a little bit firmer than that. We'll add a little bit more of that icing sugar, and I'm just going to pick up some of the icing sugar from around the bench because I don't want to add too much here. If you do that stretch test and it stretches like ½ an inch and then breaks, you need to add a little bit more water because it's actually a little bit too firm. All right, so let's give that another stretch test and see if it's ready. So we're just going to pull. That's perfect. So you can see there, when I stretch the fondant, it stretches out about 2 inches and then it breaks. That's what I'm looking for in the consistency of my fondant. That's the consistency that I really like to work with. All right, so all up, that's been about 8 to 10 minutes of kneading. And this is a little bit of a workout, so think of it as burning off calories before you start eating all of that sugar. Now, to store your fondant, you want to make sure that you've wiped off any excess icing sugar, and we're going to take some more of that Crisco or that vegetable shortening, once again just in your hands, rub it on your hands, and you're going to smear it all over that fondant. This is to give it a really nice sort of a waxy protective coat, and it's actually going to absorb that shortening overnight anyway, but it stops it from drying out because we really don't want dry edges on the fondant. Beautiful, so you do want to make sure that you wrap this really well. That's going to be what stores and preserves your marshmallow fondant. So I've just got a little bit of cling wrap or plastic wrap, depending on what you call it. I'm just going to roll out a little bit of that, and we're going to coat our shortening covered fondant, not once, but twice. So I like to coat it once this way, and then I'm going to turn it around. Make sure that you get the edges, and we'll wrap it the other way. But just make sure you've got a really nice even wrap and no air is going to get in. All right, so there you've got your plastic wrapped, shortening covered marshmallow fondant. Now this needs to sit overnight, so give it at least 12 hours, but 24 is preferable. We're going to have a tidy up, and I'm going to show you some that I prepared earlier, and we're going to discuss how to store it long term, how long you can keep it for, and how to colour it.